Okay. Okay, so we're here to talk about frameworks today, and we're going to talk about our articles. So I've really been rattling things around in my head for the last week, kind of trying to wrap my brain around the different types of frameworks, from the theoretical to the conceptual to the interpretive. And I think I've hit on an analogy that really helps me keep the different types of frameworks straight in my head. So imagine you're an archaeologist, right? And you're going to go out and you want to do a dig. The theoretical framework helps you figure out where to dig. So, based on everything we know from previous research, from previous studies, this might be a good place to dig, or maybe we want to dig over here. But the theoretical framework kind of helps you look at what everybody's done in the past and help you figure out where you're going to dig to get your information. The conceptual framework is the tools that you're going to use to do your dig. So, are the fossils that you're looking for 30 feet down and you need an excavator? Or are they very delicate and you need little tiny picks and brushes? Do you need a shovel, right? The conceptual framework helps you figure out how to do the dig. And then the interpretive framework is the lens at which you use to look at what you find. So the interpretive framework is, once you've collected all of the data, how are you going to look at it? Are the fossils that you've collected going to go in a museum for public education? Is it written specifically for researchers in your field to further their knowledge? Or maybe it's an interdisciplinary study where the things that you found are going to help medicine or going to help sociologists, right? So that interpretive framework kind of helps you determine the direction that you're going to go once you have collected all of your data or information. And that's kind of how I keep them all straight in my head: theoretical versus conceptual versus interpretive. I don't know if that helps anybody else, but that was what's been rattling around in my brain for the last few days.
Thanks, Aaron. I think that's like a good jumping off point. I think analogies are something I did not do for this assignment. So I was like, man, that was a really good idea. I kind of looked at, kind of the general overview of this is, kind of understanding that like knowledge isn't something we all like agree on. Like it's not like matter, like I'm here, I'm physically here. Like even with the kind of nature of what we understand to be data or what we understand to be inputs and outputs, all of that is, kind of in some ways existing. And we just need to figure out how we frame it and, kind of what way do we shine a light on the things in front of us. And so that's kind of where I kind of looked at all of this. So, first kind of understanding, through qualitative theory, we're going to look at things from the individual. And then we're also going to look at how that individual bumps against the rest of the world around them. And, what kind of friction or what kind of help or what kind of alignment, sorry, just turned on, that creates is based on what color light you have put into that person interacting with the world. And so, we have kind of what the theory of the knowledge is, and then kind of like what light are we looking at, and then what are we going to collect from that? There's a lot of things you can collect. And I think the subtext of this chapter, I think, is that some things take more tools than other things.
Mhm.
And that's okay. If you're not going to use multiple tools, you're going to collect a lot more individual data. So recording an interview is going to be a lot more work because there's a lot more words than having kind of a directed question, which is somewhat open-ended would be. So that's another piece that like I kind of took from this is like, if you do use multiple tools, you're probably you're probably going to be a little bit more superficial than if you use one very very large tool like an interview or like a focus group. So those are just kind of my initial places that I just kind of took off generally from this chapter.
I like that, bumping up against. That phrase is going to stick with me because I think you're absolutely right. How do we interact with each other in the world?
So one thing that I was looking at the chapter is that in the chapter and also like just from like the articles reading is that I need to pay more attention when I'm reading the article. Sometimes I feel like I'm just reading just to read through. And now
Hmm.
that in this class we have to actually like seek out and look at what are like the paradigms and like the what kind of data we're looking for. Is it quantitative data, okay, but is it like methodological, is it conceptual? So now I actually have to pay attention to that and like being particular about going back and rereading. So seeing that makes me realize I have been reading a lot of articles based on one area more than I've realized. And maybe I need to broaden my horizon, like Alicia said, stop trying to focus on one thing, because that one thing could be like, that could maybe lead to outliers that could add more questions than that you want, which is a good thing sometimes. But I do realize that now, like, I need to focus on more, like, to just like set what I've been just showing myself to do.
That is so true because I used the same article for both parts of the assignment this week. I did the assumptions, my paper on the assumptions, and what I'm going to talk about today for the frameworks on the same article. And you're absolutely right, Tony. It really forced me to dissect the article and read it perhaps a little bit more critically than I've read some of the articles in the past. And I think I took more away from the article because I was specifically like trying to pick out those pieces than I might have if I was just reading it for something else. Um,
I'm gonna be honest with you. I actually have to kind of look up the results of my
Mhm.
study because like I didn't care about that for this. Like, you know, it's kind of
Mhm.
to your point of reading more carefully, I kind of read more specifically looking. So I was kind of like search and find. And I think that, you know, as we kind of go into doing like a lot of research, this actually reminded me that like don't read all the stuff. Read the stuff, you know, look to find this, you know, what is this article about? What is the theoretical framework? What type of study is it? And what are the results? Like that, you know, that kind of like real clash together quick, but actually like then I don't really think about the results because I was so quick focused on like the structure and the stuff. So you know, you kind of miss the forest. I have the opposite. I miss the forest for the trees and to a certain degree because I was just so focused on that kind of stuff. Although I do think that that would probably be a good way to organize the research we're doing for our dissertations and you know in Zotero in our summaries is to just kind of more look at the stuff, but remembering the outcome a little bit more
See, that's so
intentionally.
funny because when I was doing the assumptions and when I was looking at the frameworks, the results in my particular study were integral to some of those pieces of the framework and the assumptions. So I actually paid more attention to the results than I might have otherwise. Particularly because, well, I'll just tell you. So my article was beyond the traditional retention data, a qualitative study of the social benefits of living learning communities. And I'll tell you, I found the article because I was specifically, one of my keywords was qualitative studies, because I didn't want to wade through a whole bunch of articles to try to find one, at least for this first week, to try to find one that was qualitative. So I actually stuck qualitative as a search term. And so this particular study, what they did was they were looking at living learning communities at a Midwest state university. And a living learning community is it's cohort learning, but all of the students in the learning community also live in the same dorm on the same floor. So basically, it's a kind of a cohort on steroids. Um, and as I was reading through it and I was looking for the different frameworks, that was when I kind of had my realization because the initial framework, the theoretical framework, comes at the beginning of the article when they're talking about all of the background research that they did and all of the other cohort-based studies and living learning communities that they had studied. And that was kind of how they based their research, right? Was on all of the stuff that they had learned from others who went before them. Then I got to the middle of the article, which is where the framework where they figured out the tools that they were going to use, and they used focus groups. I thought they did a good job. They had students from both students that were in living learning communities and students that were not.
Oh, okay.
And they pulled them together in focus groups. They asked them open-ended questions. And then what they did was each researcher, there were two researchers, each researcher read the results separately. They didn't talk to each other. They coded them for themes. And then they pulled in a third researcher who was familiar with living learning communities, but not a part of their study. And so then they got together afterwards and checked their results with each other. And that was to minimize biases. So they wanted to make sure that they weren't like, bouncing things off of each other and reinforcing their biases. So they had each of them did it completely separately and then came together to make sure that the results meshed well. And then the interpretive framework was where I felt that this study didn't do a great job, because at no point did they tell us who they were. Like, I know who the names are on the article, but they don't tell us who they are in relation to the school and or the students. Like, I automatically assumed they were faculty, but at no point do they say that they're faculty. At no point do they say what their interest in the research is, why they're doing it, or what they intend to do with the research when it's done. So that
Okay.
interpretive framework, that lens through which they viewed their results, was really the only piece that was kind of missing. I thought they did a great job on the other two frameworks. It's just that last one. It was like, hey, who are you, and why are you doing this research, and where's it gonna go? So yeah, I did spend actually quite a bit of time with the results, Alicia, because in the
Yeah,
results, they did a lot
that's
of
really
direct quotes. Um, they broke them down into sections so you could see the themes that they used, and then they showed a lot of direct quotes to kind of support their themes.
gotcha. My article was, are we exposed to that college environment? Exploring the socialization of early college, high school students. And so I thought this was kind of interesting because I think this is kind of an area that I have not read a lot of like studies on. And I'm about to have an early college student. And it's actually one area that my work, 60 by 30, is not highlighting at this time. It's not an area where we have any like tentacles. So I thought it was just kind of an interesting like and to your point, Erin, it also was very easy to identify as a qualitative study.
Mhm.
So some of the philosophy behind this is that going to college is good. So that was a clear like philosophy that was kind of embedded throughout the article. And so if, preparing in high school to be a college student will make students more prepared and more willing to go, was both, there's kind of a point where it was assumed, but also one of the things that they were going to test. And, or one of the results of the test that kind of became clear as well. So this was a qualitative study using several different methods. They used a case study of one high school. So they collected interviews, they did demographic questionnaires, and they coded documents from the school about this topic. They used a theoretical framework called organizational socialization framework. And so that's the light that they should shine on the students as they kind of bumped into the questions. There are two research questions where: how are students socialized to college, and what do they learn from this socialization? The results were they feel academically supported as they're socialized to go into a college environment, that actually taking college courses while in high school is one of the best methods by which they adapt socially to college. And as they gain independence, they're more socialized to be seeing themselves as a college student. So it was kind of that was kind of the themes that emerged based on these. And then those themes they were going to use, and I had to write them down. I actually went into the article and grabbed them while you're talking, Erin, because I was like, I should really like be able to articulate this more. So those themes are what they're using to actually influence policy. So they're actually going to go back to the high school and say, we have confirmed that enrolling in dual enrollment classes socializes students to college better than other interventions, and so that's going to be part of the policy moving forward.
Interesting. So they had a clear goal in mind, like a clear, like, once we collect all this data, this is what we're going to do with it.
Exactly. And so I think it kind of goes to that positivism that was discussed, that the author also has, where it almost, like, although I searched specifically for qualitative, there is seemingly almost a quantitative portion to it as well, with some of the demographic and some of the document review, and then how they really kind of took those themes and interpreted them for use in policy.
That's good because it sounds almost more mixed methods, where you kind of see both pieces, which I think can be the best of both worlds, right? Where you have the hardcore numbers to back you up, but you also have the people piece.
Correct.
Did they say like the final outcome? Like, did they follow up with the kids after a few years, or it kind of was just like, we'll stick
Nope.
here?
They're just informing some policy that you should do dual enrollment, that it does and then they had more, it did have kind of a social justice bent to it as well, because they were focusing on that particular high school had like a high level of marginalized population, first generation students. And so the research and this is where I'm a little confused. So you have your philosophy as a researcher coming in, and that, like I said, that going to college is good, that it, getting opening college up to more people and encouraging them to go is good. But then the lit review happens, and in the lit review, they're kind of showing that going to college for particular populations is one of the best, like, methods by which families are empowered and blah blah blah. And so, like, at what point does the researcher's philosophy end and the lit review, and is the lit review just kind of like proving, or not proving, but like documenting some of the researcher's philosophy going in? I thought of that a lot.
I think that it's both, right? I mean, the lit
Yeah.
review kind of tells you where they're coming from and why they're doing the research that they're doing. To me, like I said, that lit review is part of that theoretical framework that kind of helps you understand where they're coming from, why are they doing this research. You're absolutely right. What are their values and beliefs, right? What are the things that are informing their research, because that is how we form our values and our beliefs, right? At least as a scientist, you go
Right.
back and you look at the past research. So to me, that lit review is kind of more than one thing, right? It's helping you figure out what you want to study and what has come before you and giving you that framework to work with. But it also, in some ways, right, is, an explanation to the
Yeah.
reader of what your values are, because you're probably, well, I don't know. There's probably not going to be a whole lot of let me find this article that I vehemently disagree with, right? That is
Right.
completely against my values, and then let me use this, that's, you don't see that very often, right?
Right. And it's not like, oh, we went out and found that actually working. I mean, they were looking at one specific
Yeah.
thing, and they were proving, they wanted college. So they weren't going to bring in how work might affect it. Right. Because
Yeah.
that's just irrelevant. But that does, kind of shape the understanding of what the study looked at.
Okay, I can start. But that was a good article. That was a good idea to see. Like you said, you have an incoming student who's going to be early middle college. So it's good that you found some use of it too.
Yeah.
And then, so let me get my title. I'm sorry, guys. My personal computer died, so now I'll finally reboot it.
Oh, wow.
To get where my stuff was. Okay. So the article that I was looking up, it was from a dissertation from a student from Western Michigan University, and they looked at the African American student retention, a study of the effectiveness of an intrusive, intrusive advising I cannot speak, intervention at a career college. Okay.
Okay.
We'll try that again. African American Study of Retention, a study of the effects of a intrusive advising intervention at a career college. There we
At a
go.
career college?
Career college.
Career college, okay.
The person doesn't say where the college was at, what area, but I from reading it and from the staff that she thanked in her acknowledgments, it makes me think it's Michigan. Maybe even it could be Western, this is where she did her studies at, but it doesn't really say. But just from I looked up some of the people that she thanked in like her acknowledgments, and makes me think it's somewhere in Michigan at least. So what the article was looking at, first was that it was a qualitative data was collected and analyzed using a quasi-experimental research design method with methodological. So the person who was in the article, I don't know if we say their name, but Bert, what's her last name? She utilized interviews, focus group, and just collect the data that way by interviewing students. The students were selected randomly and they were asked to join voluntarily rather than like when they're coming in and say, oh, you're gonna be in this group. So I can see pros and cons with that, because what if you didn't get the number of students who joined voluntarily versus like if you really just told them you're in this focus group, maybe the number could have been higher and the data could have been more, I don't know, even more accurate, depending on what college you're at and how big the college is. If the number being too small or too big could probably affect the end results, in my opinion. But the author goes on to say that she's looking for two things among the groups they're studying. So one group was given a to determine whether there are a difference between two randomly selected groups of students, one receiving intrusive advising and the other receiving standard advising. So that included more follow-ups with them throughout the semester or quarter. She had put both semester and quarter in there, so I guess try to deter us from really seeing what school they're at. So I'm trying to see if by having more one-on-one time with their advisor, more revising from their advisor, can it differ from them how their experience at their first year? And if a difference existed, determine how much of a variance the difference was. So during their time there they had a talk in the beginning of the semester when they first got into like the study, middle of the semester, and then end of the school year. So they did that to see one where everyone was at based on like how the first semester beginning, everyone's starting the first semester, they're happy, they're excited. You kind of midterm, you kind of in right there, you're like, I'm okay, I don't know. In the semester, you really see how everyone's feeling because that final grade's coming out. So from there, she was trying to see, is there a difference if you have the different advising styles for each student. The goal was to see how the retention can affect students who are African American in the population at that school that she was looking at, and if the different advising styles would be helpful in seeing if that affected them. From reading it, first after each time they did the same questions, for interview and focus group, kind of same questions. There's like 5 questions they asked them each time. Um, Okay, I can't find the pages on right now. But each time they ask them kind of similar questions. How's the semester going? Is there things that you want to change about your semester? What's something that you would want to add in your semester? Things like that. Trying to get an idea of what is good, what is bad for them. And from what I was reading, there seems to be no significant difference in the two for the students,
Really?
based on, so this only happened for one semester. Maybe if it happened for at least a whole school year or even multiple school years, we may see a difference. But usually I find that a lot of schools that first year, a lot of schools are checking in with their first year students, make sure they're selecting the right classes. So maybe that had a impact on it too. But I to me personally, I would feel if she could, I know she probably don't extend it that long, but she could do it for an entire school year or maybe even 2 school years. We could see how the retention would impact the students coming back from the school year. Because usually I've seen where most students come back at least for the one whole year versus a half just leaving at the end of the semester.
Okay. Interesting.
So I have a question. Like that, what part, like the focus group information, she asked the same questions. Did she now I know it's a dissertation, so I know it's like 160 pages, so you might not be there yet. But like the responses on the focus group questions, did she kind of track those changes over time with those questions, and like how did she code that and compare the two groups?
So from what I read, they were tracked to see if there was any similarities between the groups.
Gotcha.
And if there were differences, how the differences were and how they like talked about them. So that could be as simple as students, if there was a similarity, them saying like kind of the same thing, like class is going great, this is going great, I'm having a great semester. Or if there's some differences, seeing if that the differences involve the same subject. So if it's like, for example, in English class, what's going on in this English class? You both have it, same professor. What's going on in that? You show two different kind of like you show two different ideas of like how the English class is going for you. Things
Interesting.
like that. So
Okay.
That seems like
yeah. See,
so much work.
caught, it caught my eye because I do know for my dissertation it's gonna be somewhere within the minority community, specifically with African American students. That's why it kind of caught my eye. I have been reading a bunch of different runs. That one caught my eye the most because it talks about retention, and that's something that I think I'm pretty leaning towards with mine too.
So you probably are looking at a critical race theory framework
Mm-hmm.
when you move forward. I kind of recommend my article because like it actually had a positive outcome. That's another thing that like working for the Office of 60 by 30 is a little sad because like all we hear is the things that don't work and like very few things actually work. So I think, kind of where qualitative research can really help is before you, in your instance, you have two subgroups and a intensive advising model requires more advisors. So it's going to require a bigger, investment. It's also going to require logistics that you don't necessarily have to have when it's just drop in when you can feel like it. So there's actually more of a structural investment than just the additional advisors. So before you go whole hog and do it on everybody, where you could really get kind of that like quantitative data, doing a small focus group and using those kind of those questions and seeing over time and seeing how the two groups develop and noticing that kind of like they develop the same. And so the intrusive advising may be one part of a secret sauce in a bigger success framework, but it doesn't stand on its own.
Yeah.
And so don't scale it on its own. Because that doesn't you're going to put a whole lot of investment, get a whole bunch of quantitative data. Now, just because this it is a subgroup, so then the opposite is also true, that like maybe just this particular group of students and these 4 intrusive advisors were terrible, who knows, like, but it is kind of an interesting place, a cheaper, quite frankly, and way to start to see like can we really do this, and then will it matter. So that's kind of what I kind of rambled there, sorry, but I found that very interesting.
So how are we all feeling about frameworks?
I feel like, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You.
I feel like I will need to do more reading, more learning about it. I'm not afraid to admit that I'm not strong in this area right now, but I feel that this class challenges us to step out our comfort zone and get reading, understanding, and I think it'll be helpful, especially when writing our dissertations or just trying to find the proper articles we need that will help us in our papers.
Yeah, I find the framework, applying a framework kind of confuses me. Okay. But my article did like a good job of like, this is just social organizational framework. And so and it was more like an outline of the assumptions that they had already made. And so in that way, it was more broad as a framework. The research questions really drove the, everything that came past it. And the framework kind of helped keep, this is what we're going to look at when we get data from those research questions. So in some ways, like it was kind of nice to see a really broad framework. And the lit review was really on, how do we get marginalized populations to be more accustomed to socialized into a college culture? And the talk about the theory was like 3 paragraphs. Wow. It was just like, this is what it is. Cause it was, like I said, it wasn't such a so-and-so's leadership philosophy of this. It wasn't so specific. It was just like a broad ranging, like these are the kind of the things we're going to look at when we ask these questions. So again, highly recommend my article. I think I might be using it next week too.
I think, well, sorry, Erin.
It's okay. I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, I think I have a better understanding of frameworks now and a better foundation for looking at how to pick out a framework, as well as the different types of frameworks. And just an FYI, I have the free version of Zoom. We get 40 minutes and we've got about 2.5 minutes left before it's going to. We've actually been talking longer than you think.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, I do think that after reading this chapter and some of the articles in this week's readings and applying it, that's what I like, is the application. It's not just read these articles, it's read these articles and then apply it to this other article. And I do feel like I have a better understanding of how to figure out which frameworks to use and when to use them and how to apply them. So I'm feeling a little better than I was on Monday when I first started reading.
Yeah, and I think it helps to, as you mentioned before in class, Erin, that you have to get used to the repeating. The repeating is actually helpful for me in the articles that you mentioned, like remember keep repeating, stating your purpose, repeating your purpose in the introduction and in the
Yeah.
conclusion. That's actually helpful. Like, it's like it saves me from having to go back up and try to find like where did they say this at? I'm like, I know they said it at least 10 times, so I know I'm gonna find it somewhere fast.
It's not natural for me. I don't know about you, but for me, like I'm the kind of person where I don't want to repeat everything over and over. I told you already. Like, why do I have to tell you again 47 more times? So it's definitely like it goes against my nature.
As I say, every paper I've written for this program so far begins with, in this paper, I will do the following. So I was like, oh, good. That part I got.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna stop the record. If we're done talking about frameworks, I'm just gonna stop the recording and then we've got a minute to kind of finish up with each other.
Great.
Let me stop the